Dr. Brenda Nazareth Menezes is an MD in dermatology with 35 years of experience. She is a mentor and past president of the St. Luke's Medical Guild Goa, as well as a member and past president of the Goa Association of Dermatologists, of the Indian Association of Dermatologists, Venereologists and Leprologists.
Good day to all our listeners. It is a pleasure to be here once again, today to talk to you on leprosy. Though an unusual topic, it is very important to talk about it because of its consequences. Leprosy is one of the oldest diseases known to humanity and could very well be the world's oldest disease. It was always very much feared as well as misunderstood. It is said to have originated in India around 2000 BC. However, Egyptian papyrus parchments around 1550 BC had mention of the disease. The Sushruta Samhita in 600 BC had references on treating leprosy, or kushta as it was called, with chaul mogra oil, which remained the mainstay of treatment for centuries. The Old Testament too has a number of references to leprosy. In fact, the whole of chapter 13 of Leviticus speaks of leprosy, giving instructions on how, after showing to the priest, the person was either declared clean or unclean. Further, even garments worn by these diseased persons had to be treated in a particular way. In the New Testament, we have the account in the Gospel of St. Luke, where Jesus heals the 10 lepers in Luke 17, verses 11 to 19. In those days, they had to stay away from the towns and live in caves in what was termed as leper colonies. They were looked upon as dead to society. They had to wear particular type of clothes, stay away from people, wear bells, and ring them saying, "Unclean, unclean," if anyone approached too close. The rabbis judged leprosy as a punishment from God due to sin. Today, the so-called lepers are no longer called by this term, but rather as a person suffering from leprosy or Hansen's disease, named after the Norwegian scientist Gerard Hansen, who discovered the causative organism Mycobacterium leprae. Up to this time, it was thought to be hereditary. In Europe, leprosy first appeared in the records of ancient Greece after the army of Alexander the Great came back from India, and then it also appeared in Rome in 62 BC. It continued to spread throughout Europe, then to Africa and South America, and then to the United States as well as Canada, and finally throughout the world through trade and war, and was endemic in the middle centuries. Later on, its incidence decreased, although it is still very much prevalent in Asia and Africa. Now, leprosy has a very long incubation period, around 5 years, but it can also be from 1 to 20 years, depending on the immune status of the person and the fact that the bacteria are very slow growing. So, Although in the olden days, leprosy sufferers were isolated and ostracized, it was more because of the hideous sores and disfigurement and the fact that there was no real cure for it, rather than because it was very contagious. The disease is contracted through droplet infection via secretions from the upper respiratory tract of an infected person. The chances for transmission increased in families because of the inherited lack of resistance to the disease and also because of close proximity and overcrowding. Of course, a poor economic status would not ensure the proper health and medical care. Unfortunately, throughout the world, those suffering from leprosy were always discriminated against. They were stigmatized and denied their basic human rights, and they were incarcerated into asylums and leprosaria and abandoned by their near and dear ones. It was in these leprosaria that many saintly men and women, priests and nuns, looked after these patients. Saint Damien of Molokai, a Catholic priest from Belgium, went to serve in the leper colony in Hawaii in 1873. He himself contracted leprosy in 1885, but he continued to minister to the lepers until his death in 1889. He was beatified by Pope St. John Paul in 1995 and canonized by Pope Benedict in 2009. Now, coming to the clinical features, what does leprosy look like and how does it appear? Well, there are a variety of ways in which this disease can present. It all depends on the innate immunity of the person, namely, the ability of the person's immune system to fight against the infection. Of course, if the immunity is very good, one will not develop the disease, even if exposed to highly infectious patients. If the immunity is fairly good, one can develop the first stage of the disease, known as indeterminate leprosy, wherein the infection is not obvious or clear-cut, and the body may be even able to overcome the infection. There might appear a patch or two of hypopigmented areas or some nerve involvement by way of sensory or motor loss. But if the immunity goes down a little more, then this indeterminate type can progress to the next level of what we call tuberculoid leprosy. The patient's immunity is still good enough, and the bacilli are not allowed to multiply too much. The patient can present with either a patch with decreased pigmentation or one which is reddish in color and raised. In both cases, there is a loss of sensation to touch, temperature, and pain, and the nerve supplying the area will be thickened. If the patient's immunity continues to be good, the disease will not progress further and with the right treatment will be cured. But if the immunity of the patient continues to deteriorate, this type of leprosy can then progress to the borderline type. It can be either tuberculoid or the lepromatous type at the other end of the spectrum, where the lesions will become frankly lepromatous. So, at one end of the spectrum is the tuberculoid variety with good immunity, and at the other end is the lepromatous type with poor immunity, and in the middle is the borderline type which can either be borderline tuberculoid on the one hand and borderline lepromatous on the other hand, where there is involvement of the entire skin of the body as well as the nerves and the systems as well. This is the frankly lepromatous type, where the skin becomes thickened and infiltrated and may ulcerate. The face then becomes leonine in appearance, looking like a lion, and there is a loss of sensation over the hands and feet that causes traumatic, non-healing ulcers and even loss of digits. Patients are now highly contagious because there are numerous bacilli in their tissues, which their bodies can no longer fight against and destroy. If neglected and left untreated, this stage can prove disastrous to the patient with a lot of tissue damage and morbidity. But if diagnosed, even at this stage with proper, regular and prolonged treatment, it is curable. However, it is always best to be aware of any suspicious-looking lesions and get them examined by a skin specialist or a doctor or a paramedical personnel who have been trained especially to detect leprosy. Just as for any other disease, the earlier it is diagnosed, the simpler and faster is the treatment and the response, and the less likely the disease will be to spread. This is in brief about the clinical features of the disease. Now let us talk a little about how leprosy is treated. For centuries, it was being treated with the oil from the chaulmugra nut, both locally on the lesions as well as by injections, which were very painful. There was minimal success with this line of treatment, but it was only in the 1940s that some advances in the treatment of leprosy were made with the discovery of the sulfones, namely bromine and dapsone. Then, for about 10 to 20 years, it worked very well, but soon the bacteria developed resistance to the drugs. So, further research continued until in 1970, when the multi-drug therapy with dapsone, clofazimine, and rifampicin was discovered and recommended by the World Health Organization, which also supplies these medicines free of cost to endemic countries. It proved to be a real boon, and it transformed leprosy from being a scourge of humanity to a curable disease. The schedule and length of treatment depends on the type of leprosy, which in turn depends on the immune status of the patient. MDT or multi-drug therapy continues to be the mainstay of treatment till date, with updates from time to time. This again is just in brief about the treatment of the disease. There can be numerous complications in the progress of the disease itself, as well as subsequent to treatment, especially of the advanced cases. But any more information on this would be beyond the scope of this talk. Suffice it to say that early diagnosis and early and dedicated treatment is imperative to cure and control the spread of this disease. In the world today, it is said there are 210,000 new cases being diagnosed every year, with the majority of cases originating in India. It is said that more than half the number of cases of leprosy in the world are in India. in certain states of India, leprosy is rampant and endemic. In Bihar, 17% new cases were children. In a bid to raise awareness of the disease worldwide and to emphasize that the disease can be prevented, treated, and cured, World Leprosy Day came into being. A French humanitarian, Raoul Follereau, in 1953, chose the last Sunday in January for that date, namely the third Sunday from Epiphany, as per the Catholic calendar. As and where the World Leprosy Day is kept, the Gospel, where Jesus heals the leper, is read. In India, the 30th of January is kept as Leprosy Day, in commemoration of Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our great nation, who was martyred on this day, and who had worked closely and tirelessly for the upliftment of victims of leprosy. He understood them and this disease. He said, "Leprosy work is not merely medical relief. It is transforming frustration of life into joy of dedication, personal ambition into selfless service." What a beautiful missionary statement. It is truly a fitting tribute to pay to one who loved his suffering fellow humans and therefore who loved God. For St. John tells us in 1 John 4:20, "Those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen." At this juncture, I would also like to remember Saint Mother Teresa and pay tribute to her and the tremendous work she did for these very same leprous patients, cast away from their homes to die on the streets. We call to mind how she cared for them and what an example she is to all of us. I also remember Baba Amte, who dedicated his life to care and rehabilitation of leprosy patients in his Anandwan or Garden of Joy. These people are truly inspirations for us. On this World Leprosy Day, many skin specialists and medical professionals, government and non-government organizations, especially those who are involved in leprosy eradication programs, hold public meetings and educational outreaches where they instruct the people about leprosy and on its early diagnosis, treatment, and cure. Various programs are held to raise funds for needs of these patients. In addition, seminars are conducted to take cognizance of the problems faced by these patients and measures taken on how to rectify them. But, as with any day that is celebrated in remembrance of something, a single day is not the end of it all, but should be just the beginning of like action to be carried out throughout the year. This year, the theme for World Leprosy Day is Zero Disabilities for Girls and Boys. Last year alone, some 18,230 children were diagnosed with leprosy. That means that every half an hour, a child is diagnosed with leprosy. Just imagine how large the task ahead is to see that all these children are treated in time and regularly and deformities to be prevented. We can no longer pretend that this is not a problem or bury our heads in the sand and wish the problem away. We need to talk about the disease and raise awareness of it, of the various signs and symptoms, and the fact that it is treatable and curable and deformities are preventable. To control the disease way back in 1955, the Government of India launched the National Leprosy Control Program with the introduction of dapsone for the treatment. Then, in 1983, a further National Leprosy Eradication Program was launched with the multi-drug therapy recommended by the WHO. With these efforts, it was possible to control and, in a way, eliminate leprosy at the national level by 2005. But this meant that now the prevalence rate was less than 1 in 10,000 population. But the problem remains in certain endemic states. And for that, another program was drawn up in 2012 called the Special Action Plan for Endemic Districts. Treatment is available at government-run health centers free of cost through this National Leprosy Eradication Program, known as NLEP. This program is a centrally sponsored health scheme of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. All new cases have to be registered with the health services. While the NLEP strategies and plans are formulated centrally, they are implemented by the State Directorate of Health Services. The program is also supported by the World Health Organization, also by the International Federation of Anti-Leprosy Associations, and other NGOs. Coming to Goa, we have a very old leprosarium in Makasana. Now, although leprosy is not endemic in Goa, there have been 130 new cases in 2016 to 17 as per reports, while till November 2017, there are already 56 new cases detected. These are mostly reported from among the migrant population who were most probably exposed to the infection in their home state and have now manifested the symptoms and signs after a fairly long incubation period, as I mentioned earlier. They were mainly from Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Orissa, and Maharashtra. Therefore, certain high-risk areas were identified in Goa some years back. These were from Shimbel, Vasco, Ponda, Taligaon, and Kepe. The reports of a recent survey are still awaited. To summarize, leprosy is no longer a disease to be dreaded or stigmatized or ostracized. It is fully curable. Treatment is free. It is a mildly contagious disease with a long incubation period. The causative bacteria affect the skin and the nerves and the tissues in the comparatively cooler parts of the body, for example, the hands, the feet, the eyes, the earlobes, and the nose, etc. Lesions appear on the skin, which may be whiter or redder than the surrounding normal skin, with loss of sensation, while later on, if not treated, the lesions may become thickened plaques and nodules with damage to the nerves, causing paralysis of muscles and anesthesia of the hands and feet. Let me reiterate once again that we must create awareness that this disease has to be diagnosed correctly, treated as early as possible to cure it, and prevent deformities, and rehabilitation must be carried out so that these patients are brought back into the mainstream of socio-economic life and are once again productive citizens of our nation. I thank you all for having listened to my talk on leprosy, and I hope and pray that it has made a difference.